Hello, everybody. Welcome to mini proposal workshop. Today we are in Deep Funding Town Hall, and today we are going to continue with a new chapter 6 called Defining Success. We're going to discuss what are the proposal outputs and outcomes, what are the main risks that could prevent us from delivering the project. And we look at a bit like catalyst funds, challenge settings, which are also an open question, like where would we orient this? So the problem and solution statement we're actually working on is open source DAO platforms that use AI are not being integrated with each other. And this we will, in the collaboration section, we found this the problem, like the biggest problem to be addressed. And our solution was to create community standards on how to introduce interoperable AI features. And in the context of that, we will be then discussing all of these questions. In here, the team outlines the key success criteria for the projects, and then we define how to progress towards the criteria. And this includes both quantitative and qualitative measures, adoption, satisfaction, increased revenue, and the chapter also sets clear measurable targets for each key. It does set KPIs, but not all of them. The main goal here is to answer discussions and basically come out with a successful, like the success of what makes this solution successful towards that problem. So what are the proposal outputs and outcomes if you would think of a solution to create the community standards and how to introduce the interoperable AI features, and where the problem is that AI platforms are not being integrated with each other. I brought some examples, like in some cases there could be videos, templates, and proposals, could be the outcomes themselves. Here, I think the main thing what yells out is a standard itself. So a documentation of a standard, a readable document, I would assume. Could at least include one example, so a template example, how to integrate tools with selected platform. I would say the outcome should also describe what kind of DAO platforms we are talking about. And that we want to integrate. And one we have discussed in these meetings has been Daolens for now. But does anybody else know DAO platforms that should be included in this list? And when we put that here, what exactly we will create out of that? If no other DAO platforms yet come up, then one idea was that the platform, the standard itself should be a platform. At least that was a bit of a discussion in the previous one, that we just not create the standard. When we create the standard, it also means that it is an open source standard and it's something you can build on. So what is it? And let's go a bit back in a stage, and I'm gonna check the solution items on bottom here and see what we discussed. So we have a strategy of introducing AI models, and for that we will need a process. A single model provides a feature, so each model should provide a feature, and by model we mean AI model, something that does a specific thing. We need to know what the AI outputs, and that is a collaboration discussion. So one important thing which we discussed, we're gonna have discussions, we're gonna have events and workshops, events, and So events would be where people would be able to introduce tools and existing open source platforms that people want to get integrated. And one of them would be the Daolens one. And another thing is workshops themselves to give this opportunity to have a discussion. Okay, I have this tool, you have this platform, how we will integrate it. I guess it's a bit like an education. And that would a bit go under, and basically how to integrate this would create us these templates and examples. So we will be having events, which then will technically create videos and videos too. If assuming we're recording it, but as we see our economy also move forward, we also have these kind of recording meetings. Even right now, we kind of have a workshop and discussion style, which leads to like a specific outcome. Has it brought up any more ideas what the proposal outcomes will be and should be if we look at the solution and problem statement? I'll drop here how to manage data.
Related to that, what data to even manage? Like text only, audio, video?
All data. Well, technically, yeah, that is interesting. I would then scope it down to the video perhaps. Because there is the direction of audio and video material, like meetings, and deviating that kind of meeting style.
I also almost look at it differently myself, where whether it's audio or video or text, it's irrelevant. It's more about how is this data going to get used and in what format is it maintained? So if it comes in as video, well, then that's just going to get processed through an AI model that maybe extracts everything out of it, the metrics. So who was speaking, when were they speaking, timestamps, and then the transcription of what they said. So it's really just a compilation of different attributes and metrics and features of the input itself. If it's audio, it goes through transcription, also does timestamps, and then maybe attempts to capture the speaker. If it's text, then that it's pretty much in raw format, but then it has to be stored somewhere. Where does it get stored? So it almost feels like the format in which it's coming in is irrelevant. It's how do we then store it? And then there's two stages, I feel, of storage. There's the just compilation of just raw data, and then it has to go through some cleaning and processing to then be structured into more of a hierarchical structure. So something that's more familiar to folders and your typical dashboard view. But that's different, right? That's an extraction of this giant database that's I consider flat. Everything is stored in there, but then you do need a level of a way to navigate it. You need a hierarchy structure, or here's where I go for all my meeting data, or here's where I go for agenda items, XYZ. That's structured data. And so there's two states of this data, and how does that get managed?
So I dropped in another sticky, how should the information be visualized? And all of them I will be pointing towards like an example, how to integrate tools with the selected pattern. So actually this is another one. Goal is that all of these discussions will end up with an example. So we have this discussion, and there is an expectation that at the end of that, there will be a documentation out of that. So main thing I see here is then a lot of education, and yeah, I guess it's documentation. What else would we do here? Would there be any difference in like coding languages or models, or that wouldn't be that important? So as long as we have the higher abstract level, everybody, yeah, I'm not sure because I'm not like coding that much. Does the language have any difference? Like, is it relevant? Like, should there be a C++ or a JavaScript? Or...
Well, I know a little bit of context from within SingularityNET. We have something called AI DSL, like AI domain-specific language. This would be, in a way, you're talking like meeting DSL, I guess. A language focused on meeting data. I'm not a coder, so I'm not going to pretend I have full knowledge on the topic at all. But what we ended up doing in light of AI DSL is we're writing creating our own language to have it as optimized as possible. And this is in light of AI and the need for, like, if you've got millions of transactions in a second, it needs to be very optimal. And I don't think that's too relevant here. Like on the skill of thing, yeah, well, eventually if you scale it, it better be efficient, but I don't think right now, at least, it doesn't seem to me like the actual chosen language would be super impactful.
Is the spin of AI DSL, or is that
well, no, it's an internal project. No, it's not a spin-off. We do have documentation on it, and also about the language. It's called Meta Type Talk, Meta for short, and that with double T. Yeah, there's a whole there's documentation on that. I can throw the link in there. But that again, this is really focused on AI agents interacting with each other on a crazy scale. So the level of optimization is probably very much overkill for this situation.
Yeah, I see us more integrating with SingularityNet's AI DSL. That's sort of how not trying to create something like that, but just take advantage of the AI engines, the one that's choosing the AI model that gets used. So I don't see language playing a big, programming language playing a big role in this conversation either.
It might still be interesting. There's some touching surfaces on how do you deal with different inputs and how to standardize that and that type of thing. So I think I'll still check a link in the Mara board.
I went back in other sticky notes and just quickly want what were some insights more, and I see here in an issue that market is very new for people. Could this proposal also do some outreach and be more like a presentational hand where it goes out and shares with, here's a DAO platform, here's our AI tools, we will look at them, they're not yet all integrated, but our vision is at some point that they could be seamlessly used from and integrated to each other where there is a value. So it's a bit like marketing also. Or would that be too much?
I definitely saw that in the roadmap. As far as, so like we talked about with Daolens and how we arrived with Daolens was we needed some component of this dashboard to assist DAO-like communities. So it would have a way to have conversation, vote, governance, a place for documentation about this particular community or DAO, which is just one single component of the overall service that's being offered. And even that itself, there's multiple solutions. And how could we integrate more options, more of those solutions, like you said, seamlessly, such that the community themselves, the DAO, can pick and choose what tools they want to use to build their community, and how that's visualized, which could just be the back end and it all looks the same in the front end, but they're the way it's designed. And even going as far as parameterize scripts to where you can use ADAO's multi-sig address or summons or Clarity DAOs, like the contract itself that's supporting it. They can pick and choose whichever contractor, so every component, they're kind of choosing what it's powered by in the back end. But that is a highly complex, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in that. So I don't know where to start that conversation myself.
I feel like that goes to the more side of actually building the AI, where we right now is in the collaboration stage where the actual building doesn't, well, it happens on a template level. So there will be one thing, one MVP still coming out of here. But I wouldn't assume here the seamless interactions or anything. It's more like, well, this is a vision of how we will connect. And if we now scale it, it will turn into that seamless opportunity. And actually, that will then open up the next proposal, which is about the dashboard and making it seamless. So,
yeah, that's a good point, Tevo. Makes sense.
All right. So what we did now was we squeezed out some outputs and outcomes, what we would like the proposal to address. And next up is, what does success for this project look like? So when we do all of that, when we know we were successful, is the fact that all the workshops happened, or something had to happen in these, like or the amount of integrations happening, or if an adoption has to happen, is there a success metric for the adoption? Now I know where the metrics are coming from. Okay.
Now, one of the metrics I see being that at least two open source repositories have been integrated, or tools, open source tools have been integrated into, say, a single front end or a single interaction point, whatever that may be, a website or an application or something. But seeing at least two of them integrated, because the process to achieve something like that would have to overcome a lot of what we're discussing here. At least that's how I see it. Gonna have to figure out a way to communicate and collaborate and build on top of each other. And so we're addressing all of those. But that's only one metric that I would see, like that goes hand in hand with other metrics.
Multiple open source platforms and tools, let's say that. So to make it really successful, like putting at a bit higher goal that, well, we have this DAO platform and we have this AI tool, integrating them could be possible, but making so that now the other DAO platform, who is totally different infrastructure, is also able to use the same examples to integrate that AI tool, and now make it even super complex that taking some feature from that platform and integrating them into that platform. And if you could create this one triangle, then it means we have something here. and try to scale. Yeah, I think that would be an amazing success. What's your thoughts, finishing, Peter?
Well, if it actually works, right? Just the MVP kind of, yeah, showcasing that integration. That's the biggest.
Then we would need to drop something in outcomes and outputs, because the examples and templates wouldn't make this success happen. Because it misses, we are missing some outcomes here, and yeah, well,
true.
Yeah, okay, then I guess we just drop that outcome here. That as an example of how from one feature is used in another platform, from one platform to another platform.
So like a proof of concept, or?
Yeah, I also see it as an executed use case. So, I mean, if they're an open source platform and you're using them for a specific use case, then that's one example, like you're kind of how you're describing for an example of how it could be used and integrated.
So when we looked at what does the success for this project look like, I feel like this is quite a good one from the top of your head. Multiple open source platforms and tools are integrated with each other, and it's already quite a challenge. But quite quickly, we now realized, well, it is a challenge. So what makes it challenge is the risks. So what are the main risks that could prevent you from delivering the project successfully? In this case, us.
So one of the risks I see as potential actually comes from how to make this work. If you have these two open source projects, it's going to require support and development between these two entities or organizations to make that work. You know, it can't just be one-sided, like say we do all the work and development to get it integrated. It's going to require both teams to collaborate, which means that there's a potential for a lot of work being done, but not a shared distribution of value. So for that partnership and that relationship to work, both parties need to be getting value out of it. So for instance, Daolens is that open source. And if we integrate with them and we take a lot of their time and their development power to get that relationship, but then in the end, they didn't benefit from it and we took all the benefit, then it's less likely to work, in my opinion. It's just not sustainable. So there needs to be a shared distribution of value between this partnership. And I still don't know what that looks like, but I do know that's a metric or a risk that we need to be accounting for.
I have a solution for that.
Okay.
Or can we only talk about risks right now?
In the end, we have to describe and to mitigate the risk. So jumping ahead will give us insight for sure.
The first thing that comes to mind here, I'm half kidding and half serious. If you create an AI service and you put a lot of value in it and you want others to benefit from that, then the best way would be to put it on a platform so that others can use it. And then you are free to either say, in some cases, we will only charge you with the average computing cost for that service, for executing that service. And in some cases, you could say, well, we charge you a little bit extra because we put so much work in it. But just to put it on the decentralized AI service and make it available for everybody and use a monetization model below that, yeah, I think that potentially solves a lot of issues. And it's even better because by putting it on a platform like that, you might be able to connect it to many more platforms than that you are originally engaged with. That way, making the monetization even more interesting. Sorry, I'm a guy and I'm always thinking in solutions. That's probably a bad side of me, but
No, that's definitely one of the ideas that I was going for as far as the AI goes, is any AI contributions do end up on the SingularityNET, right, marketplace, so that no matter who the end user is or what platform or what website is actually consuming those services, it is properly getting distributed. That makes a whole lot of sense. In many cases, like for instance, Daolens, they have a small portion of their product is AI based, but a larger portion of it is their community tools that aren't AI. And I don't know how do we then contribute to that? You know, that's not going to be on something like SingularityNET marketplace. But we do have some ideas on trying to create an economy. So have that tokens similar to SingularityNET, but it's the end users of the platform itself, and then the revenue that's generated through the platform can be distributed to the open source repos underneath it that are supporting this platform itself. So we're hoping to try and build some of that. But I like your solution, and I think I do put some thought into that as well. However, it doesn't seem to capture the entire value exchange, right? What if this is not an AI solution that we're
we were
into?
talking about AI services, right? And how this would be. If you're talking about whole solutions, whole applications, then actually I do have another solution which doesn't exist today, but which could be built. But it's not that easy to build, but it would offer great benefit. Maybe Peter knows what I'm talking about, because I wrote it down some time ago. So what we are doing with our AI marketplace is allow everybody to create separate services, and then with AI DSL connect those services together. But that whole platform is stateless, which means that it has some limitations. In most applications, you want to have stateful services so that you can not just execute a service, but also bring data from one service to another and do stuff with that. So what I can imagine, and what would really be a dream for me to, if together with a large community, we would be able to build such a thing, is to build a platform like that, where everybody could publish their own microservice. It would be like a microservice architecture, but then accessible for everybody. And that would mean that you could, well, maybe the AI service could still live on an AI platform, and other services could live on a platform like that. And you could connect both of them. But everybody could make small building blocks with functions, and they could be monetized through API calls, similar to our AI platform. So that would be the incentive to make a small building block that is very useful. And then on top of that, people could make their own solutions. And there would still be some effort involved in creating a solution, a front end for all those services. But the costs of creating a new front end would be much lower than in a situation where you have to create all that backend services also. So I think that would really decentralize and democratize the whole ecosystem. So the question that I asked people, also to guys from Daolens, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is, yes, the risk that I see in very good solutions is that you're making a centralized solution to solve decentralization. And fundamentally, that has an issue with it. So one option, as you say, Curtis, would be to have a revenue model underneath that, so that revenue could be shared if people would use each other's tools. What I am suggesting is in a similar direction, but much more granular. So you wouldn't need to share a whole tool. You could just make a very tiny, small component And that could be shared by anybody in very different solutions. So it's funny that we just jump on this, because this is a bit of my, how do you call that? I don't know the English word for it. But an idea that I'm carrying with me for half a year or so, and probably won't have time and money to do for a while. But that I love to share and love to think about, and would yeah, if somehow we could make that happen, that would be absolutely great.
Looks like this marketplace is coming up quite several times, and it has come through this, like there are insights or sparks that may require that, yeah, we need smaller modules, else we are not able to collaborate, because you have a huge monolithic platform and you have a huge monolithic platform. What we end up knowing is that then you need to make it smaller, and basically that will be the standard guidance, which I would assume it's going to happen. And if they have all the based infrastructure, is that if everybody uses their DAO platform as a microservice offer, and they just combine their front end based on these microservices, it will be much easier for another person also fork that base architecture, but use based on their culture and their tools they are using the microservices. So back to the risks. We have two more risks. We didn't really describe how do we solve it. One is it's going to require support from both sides to collaborate. Is going to be the risk that is unmitigatable, and it is something that we just need to have a filtering mechanism, who do we start working with, and have a strong view on that. Or how would you say that?
Can you enlarge it a little bit so I can read it?
Yeah, I felt like the risk itself was more that it's potentially not an even exchange of value between these two groups. So the prerequisite is that it's going to require support from both sides. But then the risk comes in by not evenly distributing the value from that relationship or that collaboration. I don't know if that at all makes sense.
And that will go back to this not fair. However, what I see from this sticky is that there is this open source platform that may have some developers doing stuff, and then there is another one. But the fact that even if we kind of go into and let's say, oh, these are the features you have, and these are the features they have, and you would like to have these features on you, because we are not the ones developing them, they are still in the kind of we help them the guidance, we give the documentations, we get the people put together who should be talking, but it does require both sides to talk. And if somebody says, well, we just changed our plans, it looks like in 6 months we're gonna be doing a proprietary AI, and or just the scheduling, the management of a project may be already a hassle. Yeah, like where do the guardrails come in that sense, if at all? Or the way that we do describe is that we have the proposal already has a specific targeted platforms we already take into us, and it's not about that we go out there and give equal opportunity to all, but those who were at the start, and with these we are going to work. So it's already like a pre-planned a bit, and to make sure that the AI integration actually happens, that the proposal is successful.
Yeah, on the bottom line, you need buy-in from involved parties. That's very clear. Like you can't really, I mean, can you force it upon them?
And other alternative is that we do have some technical talent perhaps, and we fork the platform itself and do the integration and just hand it over. Because it is open source, you can just create it and push it. And here is the result. And then it may not be required from both sides, but then it still would require because they have to pull it in.
A risk related to that I see is that I think every project is a little bit different and or will evolve differently and therefore have different needs. So in a very early stage, I think things can be quite easily shared. But if a project evolves, then it will be very specific to a certain environment. I can already see things. So our platform, Sway, is initially created for a different context than what we are using it for right now. And I think Catalyst and Deep Funding are very much alike in their aims and the way they approach it, but the platforms are different. So I think if you are too far in your development, both from your processes and your tools, it will become harder to share things, or you can still share them, but then it will require extra effort to make certain features either generic or configurable. And those are very, very often the things that are most expensive to do. To make a tool that is a one-trick pony takes 10 hours or 10 days or whatever. But if you want to make it do 5 different things or 5 different versions of the same thing and make that configurable and have a backend for that with a user interface, etc., then it easily becomes 5 times as expensive. So in that case, you would not need to have to make it profitable. You would not need to have 5 different customers, but you would need to have 10 different people collaborating on it before it makes sense economically. So that is a risk, I think. And related to that, can I say? Well, yeah, I can also react on that first. Related to that, and I think I suffer a bit from that myself as well, is that a lot of projects will be internally focused. And at some point, what you see is not invented here syndrome. So whatever we make is the best that can be made. And what they made, yeah, they probably didn't understand or didn't make it as well or aren't as smart as we are because we know exactly what we're doing. And yeah, not invented here syndrome. That's how I would... because it takes effort, right? Personally, I'm pretty busy all day. So usually I don't really, I don't have the mind space, not even in the weekends, to go out to other platforms and other solutions and immerse myself in it and trying to discover what is good and bad about it. That takes time and effort. And yeah, if you're in the middle of your own platform and project, then often, that doesn't happen anymore. Well, before I was working at SingularityNET, I was much better involved in what happened in other projects, etc., than I am today, because I simply don't have the time anymore.
One thing I added here related to the different development and complexity is that the way we can mitigate is by starting off by integrating easier but still highly useful features. So small tips like we mentioned here, like finding that microservices to make sure that this is a small part of that, and seeing like small wins from these kinds of integrations first. We did discuss that also on the solution side when the strategy, if you do the model side and we kind of go through how do you even get accepted to the platform, what needs to be discussed. I think here was also mentioned what outputs they are model. Can we do it with API endpoint? And so targeting API endpoints to make it easiest to integrate. So
yeah. That's it. That's the microservice solution. In fact, whether it's a micro or macro service doesn't matter that much. But Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So another thing related to this, or another mitigation, would be early integration. So if you start out with a solution for one scenario, then you will overfit that solution for that scenario, meaning that it will be harder to make it also a good fit for another scenario. But the sooner you connect different use cases or different platforms or whatever in your development, the more likely it is you will focus on the things that are overlapping between everybody and that are most important to everybody. And then you can move on and take others with you. So I can imagine also if you would go for a platform, a microservice platform that is shared between everybody and where everybody can publish, it would be best to start it with 5 different platforms and have everybody give input and then start building it. That way you get better adoption, but you also get better a better fit. You get more input and more buy-in probably. But it's hard. It's hard because collaboration also takes time. It's time consuming. It's much easier. The 5 people pizza theory. It's much easier to create a solution with 5 people than with 50 people coming from 7 organizations or something. For multiple reasons.
Definitely. But going back to the last sticky note or the previous one, it's going to require support from both sides to collaborate. What can we do here? What should we do? What's the right target? Shall we have like a filtering mechanism, or shall we have already pre-chosen projects and integration that we already say that, yeah, these are the things we're gonna do for sure, so that then it's less of a black box of what the community will come up now, but more of a that at very least we will get to see this.
So just for clarity, this is in light of like in the initial proposal, if you would already have these parties selected, correct?
Yeah.
So if you don't have these selected, then the very first milestone would be to figure out interested parties. I think the proposal itself would be way stronger if that's already figured out. Yeah, but that might be quite a tough job.
Definitely got some ideas on who we could reach out to for integrating with some of these features. And personally, I think that there needs to be a framework when you're trying to collaborate, you're trying to integrate, two open source communities. There needs to be a framework on, okay, what is the scope? Are we integrating a feature? Are we integrating a function? Are we integrating a component? What's the scale at which we're trying to integrate? Then trying to align our missions. All right, well, we want to integrate it in our tool, and maybe they want it integrated as well, because then it's going to consume their API services or whatever the case is, benefit their community as well. So generate the scope of this integration. What are the alignments? What are we trying to get out of this integration from both parties? Making sure that motivation is there and shared between the two. So I do think establishing a framework is itself a task, because then it's portable at that point, right? If you have the framework, then okay, we want to integrate with somebody else, and what would it look like? And then start that conversation and have measurable attributes that can contribute to the conversation. So during the first discovery meeting, we can at least look at that. What is the scope and what are the alignments and what do we hope to get out of this relationship or this collaboration? And if that's set, kind of more structured, then you can just portable, bring it to the next community and the next community.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is like more like a business framework. So what is the scope? What is the purpose? What do we want to get out of it? All those kind of questions. And what I was thinking in the meantime, connected to what I said before, is a technical framework. So both are important. But if you could start out with a framework with some technical communication rules. How do we exchange data and how do we annotate data or whatever? Then the moment that you have two parts communicating and you have that framework, then it will be easier to have a third part that will communicate with the other two parts. And once you're there, the more parts you get, the easier it will be to grow the whole thing. And that could also be a start of solution for collaboration, right? So instead of talking about how are we going to collaborate and who is going to do what, you could separate things. You could say, this is your part and it will give you direct benefit, but we will benefit a little bit from it as well if you have it finished. And this is our part, this is our main concern. But if we have it, you can reuse it and benefit a bit from it as well. That could be a way of balancing stuff.
Let's now move to the one risk item that I brought from the previous sessions. AI is a proprietary for some platforms and are not available for sharing. What do we do then?
But can you elaborate on that one, Tevo, like an example of?
Open source platforms that use AI are not being integrated with each other, risks. I think because it's not clear where did that come from. I think this is related to the fact that they don't have it like an open source, that there may be but that it's kind of covered in the monetization. So I think it was around that some don't provide an open source way how they do this AI and what they provide an API call. So
there is a risk. So suppose that we have a collection of 10 great open source features that everybody can use. Then there's a risk there will be a third party that will also use all those 10 features. But on top of that, they will have 2 or 3 new features that only they can use. And then we have a disadvantage. We have an uneven competition because they have something we can use and we give everything away. So that is a tricky thing. Because to an end user, that solution with that those proprietary parts might be more interesting due to these proprietary parts.
Yeah, I see that perspective, and now it makes sense too. What I think this sticky was also trying to introduce some platforms that may be considered open source. There's majority of their code could be open source. However, the ML ops or the ML pipeline, the training of that model, maybe certain attributes of the AI model itself, they retain closed source because maybe that's their breadwinner or their value. And so they don't want to open source that particularly. Then how do we integrate if they're a closed sourced AI model, unless we're just using API and SingularityNET's marketplace? And that was one of the things I was hoping to do, is if we do want to integrate something and they are closed sourced or proprietary, then we just have them host it on SingularityNET's marketplace, and then we just become a consumer, an end user, and that's one of the components to the integration of their features and services. And I was hoping to try and facilitate that as much as possible. So anytime there's an AI offering hosted on SingularityNET's marketplace, whether it's ours or an integration, another project we're collaborating with. That would be our communication platform. It's how we execute their tools is through SingularityNET's marketplace. And then on the back end, we could do some just forking of their code or integration of their code.
Maxim has hand up. Maybe you had always hand up. I'm sorry, I didn't really.
No. These points you guys made right now reminds me of an event that actually kind of happened recently as well. But I wonder that you guys talk about the time factor or not, because the value of a project in AI, whatever it is, there is this time that have a very important impact on that value. Because let's imagine that I want to integrate this amazing open source project to my project, but they do not evolve and they do not develop with the same pace, with the same speed. So after a while, I will face the issue that, like, let's say the 80% or 90% of my project have evolved. Now it's better, but still that 10%, it is not at the place like the rest of the model. So that was the reason, and several times I saw it, and I've seen it in a different other project, that they chose to go with closed source or with a commercial product, because that commercial product, for whatever reason, maybe there was incentives, financial, whatever, the upgrading and updating was happening. But that open source, because it was voluntary, that project didn't know when these new features will come. And that time was really, I mean, especially in the tech environment and tech startup, the time was really important. It has really value. So one of the argument, or one of the things that I can say, that is the advantage of closed source, that for example I or any project can use it and justify, is because that open source project, we don't know when they release their next version or their stable version or something, but at least that closed source, because of all the commercial commitment they have, we can put them accountable. But the open source, we kind of cannot, like you say, hey, I'm just doing as a voluntarily. If you don't like it, leave it, or leave, or do whatever you want. So I wonder, have you guys talk about the time factor or not?
Thanks.
I know there's no perfect solution here, because also closed source has clear disadvantages. I worked a lot with closed source in the past, and it can be extremely frustrating how slow it can be to develop, because organizations get bigger and it gets harder to make changes and etc. Or they will evolve, but in a different direction than is important for you. Or they will create, which is also very common, a Swiss knife with 1023 functions, but you only need 3 of those functions, but you're paying for 1023 functions. So all of these issues occur, but you do have a very good point. The time factor is very important. Open source is also not always reliable. Time is even important also just for AI services. An AI services that is top-notch today is old a year from now, and there are better options. So how do we keep up with that? Those are very, very valid questions. Yeah, and in the end, you don't have an SLA if you use a bunch of open source software, at least usually not if you're not paying for it. So SLA as in service level agreement. So Yeah, I think a possible solution for that is to have large enough size of a community of builders and a platform that there's always an opportunity for somebody is if some part doesn't work properly anymore, that offers an opportunity for somebody else to make something that is better.
But
Probably it's a little bit, yeah.
doesn't that introduce the issue of parallelism? Like several people are doing same thing, and like especially if the market choose something that are very important, and several projects are starting to doing that, but after some time they don't care, or they are focusing on next thing, on next model, next algorithm. But those projects cannot keep up with these again new trend, and also some other part of the market will left out because they are not that much needed, and they do not have that much. The market doesn't need them that much. So after a while, we see that a part of this whole market grow very fast. Like you have so many options in some product, but you have very limited option in some areas. So these very unbalanced product, don't you think it will emerge because of this parallelism?
Well, I would say it's a market economy if it's done properly, and you do need scale for that to have it work properly. But you will see at some point that if one person creates a service or a module or whatever, which turns out to be very popular, and he makes a lot of money with it, then maybe somebody else comes along and he will say, I can make that same thing, but I can make it cheaper. And then position his own. So that's already a parallelism, but it's what happens in a capitalist environment, if you want. It's a market economy. Until there's a smart person who has an advantage by creating something new. So it should evolve over time. And yeah, if you have a proper architecture, then the old version of a service will coexist next to a new version and an even newer version. And everybody would be able to discover and to choose the parts that are most useful for them, because some will choose the ones that are most reliable or most fast, and others will choose the versions that are cheapest, and a third one will use the version that has the most configurable options. So yeah, there will be parallelism. So it's not perfect, but the outcome, it's like evolution, right? There's a lot of parallelism in evolution as well. A lot of species that don't make it in the end. But the outcome is still interesting.
Yeah, exactly. The level of competency will be the important factor. Which species will be, at least it will go for the next generation.
Yeah.
There's no any guarantee for like immortality, but at least they can pass their gene to next generation.
Yeah, well, there are some parallels there indeed. So also, if you have a good piece of code, then and that's open source, then that code might live on in other organisms, other code that will reuse that part, but still evolve. And for the community at large, that might be a very positive thing, I would say, if it's sufficiently open and democratic and inclusive. If everybody would be able to contribute to that environment, then it could, and on equal terms.
By equal terms, do you mean like all of them use same license, like all of them MIT? Or no, we can have a system that accept all sort of open source license, but I think you guys know that some license, especially with the GNU, they are very risky. That they have some limitation. But still, again, do you think with all the licenses, can we have this integration like safely with lower risk as much as possible?
That is a very good question. That is a very good question. The question is, do you want to have upfront restrictions on which licenses are and are not allowed on the platform? So do you even accept closed source parts there, yes or no? I don't have the answer to that, but yeah. So there are basically two options. Either you make it open to everybody, but you make everybody informed, which might mean that if you have a completely open source license, that you are favored by the community, that they will choose you over somebody else. But I'm not sure if it always will work like that, if people have enough knowledge about that and care enough about it. So the other way would be to restrict it some way to some kind of licenses and say you can be part of the club, but only if you share equally, like we all do. Yeah, but both have their merits, I would say.
Yeah, those are all valid points, I think, and I've definitely put a lot of thought myself into licensing. In the ideal situation is we have a new type of license, which I've been seeing the conversation and trying to understand the conversation that's happening, where they are introducing a new type of license that's more open source, but if you want to use it, you can't close source it and, fork it, close source it and turn it into a proprietary thing. That's kind of more the ideal, I think, situation, is to have a proprietary license that can establish that type of relationship. However, as I go a bit deeper in thought on it, there is ways to alleviate that concern, in the sense that what if they are fully open source, but then we're extracting the value by putting it on something like SingularityNET Marketplace, putting the API itself, the access point, on a platform where it generates revenue, then the consumer of that code can choose. Do I want to fork it and turn it into my own thing, or do I want to consume it as is out of the box by using this API endpoint? They get their share of money. We're generating value, producing revenue as well. So in my opinion, it slightly alleviates that concern by supporting the API and putting it and turning it, creating an economy surrounding that code, but still leaving it fully open source.
And some people working on open source kind of this project for API, they say we are choosing more restricted open source license because we are actually protecting our revenue or value. Because if we go with like a free software license, actually we are giving it everything free. So we won't get any value, because someone can easily fork or repo, change some name, and that's all. They can just go and extract everything value. So that they are saying that I know this is a good license, but what we can do, we have to protect our value or our work or something. Yeah, this is an ongoing discussion.
Personally, SingularityNET at some point, and maybe also in the future, but it's not actual. We aim to leverage a reputation system for services. And it can be multidimensional, so it can be partly favoritism by people saying this is something that I really like. You could have a look at usage, you could have a look at a lot of attributes from a service and somehow distract the reputation from that. And I can imagine, if you do that correctly, that you would signal that somebody would just copy code and create a newer service of an older one without adding any value. And maybe you could give that a lower reputation. On the other hand, I could just make it 2% cheaper than your service, and then I could argue, well, I add value to it because I make the same thing cheaper. And that would basically get you into a race to the bottom, which is also not healthy for an economy, I think. So, yeah.
But Jean, have you thought about royalty integrated into that reputation system as well? Like if a system emerge out of another project or another model, another algorithm, like if it is ChatGPT or GPT-3 and GPT-4 was done by another completely separate entity, still they will pay some royalty to the GPT version 3 and T to 2 and 1 and so on. And again, it is related and integrated to reputation. So if they have reputation, they can get royalty.
Conceptually, it's a very interesting point. It would be great if we can make that work, I would say.
But at the end, it's still the same thing what John said, that, well, you have your reputation, but I have half cheaper source. You now choose reputation or my.
Yeah, but when I get royalty out of your project, although it is better than mine, why not? You are my child. No problem. You inherit my code, my work, no problem. But I can enjoy your succession as well.
Yeah, that would definitely require some AI being able to determine who has borrowed from whom.
Yeah.
And where the overlap in code is, and then of course it may be possible that two people develop something completely separately from each other, but still it looks like there's a lot of overlap. So there in practice, it will be really hard, but conceptually it's very interesting. Yeah.
I've struggled with that concept myself. When I abstract it to like an artist. Every artist is inspired by something, another artist or a memory in their life, whatever the case is. And they generate art and say they're a multi-million-dollar artist and they get paid for it. How do they then distribute some of that to what inspired them to this? And because there are no original ideas. I think all of our thoughts are just synapses firing off in certain patterns, and it comes from inspiration and experience and everything in our past. So at what point do you? So if I create something, somebody forks it, they create something, somebody forks that second, and they create something, do I still get, right, the third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation? Am I still getting royalty in that sense? And it's very difficult when you try to come from who's the original idea, when we're all of our ideas
the question is, Curtis, suppose if you could make it work, would it be a bad thing or a good thing?
I think everything has a balance personally, and it both. There's good attributes and there's bad attributes. The bad attributes, one example I can think of, is that now you're driving the demand to generate revenue. So it's bringing back capitalist society. So if I want to use this, I have to generate more value than the previous generation. Yeah. And just to extract my 1%, to get my 1 or 2% that I want out of it, I have to have 1 or 2% more value than the previous generation. And it just creates this demand for revenue generating. At least that's my opinion.
What if there is a limitation for that generation? Like after 7 generation, no matter what value the 8th or 9th or 10th generation brings or create, you won't get anything. You will get only up to 7 or up to 3 or up to something.
Yeah, it can be diminishing returns, right? Yeah. The next generation will get 50%, but the generation after that would get 20% and whatever. Yeah, interesting. I saw a concept like that it was something like a maker organization where people could make actual hardware and stuff and think of things and then be rewarded in that way. So it's not completely new, but it's interesting. And I'm also thinking about stupid stuff like Amazon had at some point the one-click checkout or something. And or even a simpler button like add to cart or something, which just because they were the first to have that feature, and nobody else was allowed to use it anymore. So it can also block evaluation like that.
Yeah, the issue with pattern war, that is pattern war we have.
Yeah. I was gonna say it turns into a pattern war, and then exactly the way you described, a mix earlier could be gamed. If it's the 8th and 9th generation, well, then I can just fork it, create another generation, then fork mine, then fork it again, then fork it again. And now you're 9 generations beyond from when, you falsely created these generations. So it can be gamed. It's very
You have a
different.
criminal mind.
No, well, I'm a devil's advocate. I like to play both
But
parties.
as John said, if we integrate an AI which observe all the codes and of course observe all this reputation, because it's not just royalty, it is a reputation as well. So if you want to have another offspring, okay, fine, but you have to use your reputation to generate that level of royalty. Otherwise, you have to start from zero. So you cannot use your reputation several times. But of course, if it is just pure royalty, of course, you can do what several times. But if you integrate it with your reputation, actually, it will force you to be one. And you have to protect yourself as well. I mean, it will be self-governed as well, because your reputation and your royalty and your credibility and your legacy all will be at stake if you do not protect it. So not only you won't make another copy, but you won't allow other people make another copy or something. I think if we integrate reputation and royalty to it, because we assume reputation cannot be copied, at least.
I like the accountability.
Yeah.
100%.
Can I make one last remark on this this AI thing? I was thinking this is extremely complex. We are not there yet, but the way that I can see it work is to have a human factor in that, to have a human gateway that decides which services are and are not allowed on the platform. They will decide if it's sufficiently new based on what is already there. And if it is very much alike another service, they could maybe install some kind of loyalty reward system. Yeah, so royalty. So then it's not that open anymore, and it becomes centralized, which is a disadvantage. But it might be more fair and easier to work with.
That could be described also in a standard that, hey, that the way we collaborate is the fact that we use this reputational side of it. The people who come here first will have the benefit of capturing the most value for now, because you were here first, you wanted to collaborate, and as this platform of microservices is growing, the more people are joining in, they have that a bit like a late not disadvantage, but it doesn't mean that they can build up their reputation.
Yeah, that's one way how reputation could work here.
Yeah, I definitely see some value in that conversation as well, because when I envision how our platform is going to operate, I mean, what you described earlier, Jan, about a solution that's collecting all of these existing solutions, that's what we're trying to build here. And it's an implementation of a bunch of different solutions, but I want to treat it like a DAO. So let the community decide. And part of that community are those solutions that we're integrating and letting them help decide the direction of this platform. And I did want to build in some tokenomics such that if our platform generates revenue, which, we hope it will, then those that contribute to it can benefit from it. But it also comes into the governance and your reputation. So there is a reputation system built into that based on governance. And how could that, and that makes sense. So if Daolens was the first one to integrate with us, they acquire reputation through that relationship. And then when it comes to a vote of, hey, do we use this tool or this tool, they can vote one way or the other, and so can the rest of the community. So I see a lot of value in building a reputation system around potentially a DAO governance structure as well.
Yeah, I see a lot of benefit in having a DAO structure around this, because that way you can allow a vote or something to select new entrances to the platform. So you can have everybody, the community, decide, does this actually give enough added value to be added to the platform? I think that makes a lot of sense as well. Cool. Cool. I like this, guys.
We did have 2 topics we didn't cover, and these orange ones are optional ones, looking at can this proposal relate to sustainable development goals? And there's a tool which kind of helps to go through them and see if like, yeah, that actually works and that actually works. This can be done in a different session. And another exercise which we skipped was looking at the Project Catalyst challenge settings, which will come up in Fund 10, and see which one would fit perfectly and why. Yeah, with that, I would close today's session. Does anybody want to have some final thoughts?
I just want to share that if we had this same platform, maybe several years ago, like 2015, when Google released the paper for transformers, and OpenAI took that, and now we have all these amazing GPT 3, 4, 5. We are going to have that, but they are closed source. They do not share the source, although their work was based on that paper, and that was a revolutionary paper. So if we had this model, maybe today OpenAI had to share their work, so it would help the AI community much, much more. But yeah, we will see in future. I hope we have this platform so everyone can get benefit from it.